Today, we are going to dive into a story about a history that was basically meant to be erased. It's a story about a city left in ruins, a revolution that was drowned in blood, and one forbidden manuscript that risked absolutely everything to tell the truth.
You know, this quote really gets right to the heart of it. How do you save a story when the people in power are doing everything they can to bury it? What does it actually take to preserve a memory against an official, state-sanctioned lie? I want you to imagine Paris, but not the city of light we all think of. Picture a city of ghosts. We're talking 3 years after a brutal civil war. The streets are still pockmarked with bullet holes. People are crossing the street just to avoid their own neighbors. And this tense, fearful silence hangs over all the working-class districts. This is a city that is being forced to forget. And at the very heart of all this silence is the memory of the Paris Commune. For just a little over 2 months, Paris wasn't ruled by kings or emperors. Nope, it was run by its own people. It was one of the most radical social experiments in modern history, and the French government was absolutely determined to paint it as nothing more than a criminal nightmare. So, let's meet our guide, Étienne Mercier. He's a printer by trade, a fighter who actually survived the Commune's fall, and a deportee who somehow made it all the way back from the Fever Islands of New Caledonia. Now he's living illegally in Paris, risking his life every single day for one reason and one reason only, to write the real history of the Commune, a chronicle for the vanquished.
So what was this memory the government was so desperate to stamp out? What did the Commune actually do in those 73 days that made it so dangerous?
The question Étienne is trying to answer is pretty simple, but it's also incredibly profound. What happens when the people who sweep the streets and bake the bread and print the books are suddenly the ones in charge of everything? Well, for a brief moment, Paris gave us an answer.
And wow, what an answer it was. Now, what's really interesting here is just how practical these changes were. This wasn't some abstract theory. They separated church and state, they made education free for everyone, and they passed labor laws that actually protected workers. They even put workshops that had been abandoned by their owners directly into the hands of the employees.
This quote from a school teacher, it just captures the powerful, human impact of these reforms. Can you imagine that feeling of liberation? I mean, imagine being forced to teach rote memorization and religious dogma your whole life, and then suddenly you're told to teach science, critical thinking, civics. It was a revolution of the mind.
But this experiment in freedom, it came to a horrific end. The French army, backed by the government, laid siege to Paris and retook the city, street by bloody street, in a period of just unimaginable violence. It's known as La Semaine Sanglante, the Bloody Week.
The official death toll is a lie, let's be clear. But even the most conservative estimates, they're just staggering. At least 20,000 Parisians, men, women, children, were executed by government troops in a single week. A lot of historians think the true number is much, much higher, maybe 40, even 50,000. This testimony, given to Étienne by a priest who saw the massacres with his own eyes, it just cuts through the numbers. He described seeing wounded men begging for mercy and getting a bullet instead. He saw soldiers being shot by their own officers for refusing to fire. It was a systematic extermination of anyone who had dared to imagine a different world.
So, this is the history that Étienne is fighting to preserve. Back in 1874, he's not just a writer, he's a fugitive archivist, piecing together this forbidden history while hiding from the very people who created its bloody final chapter. His whole process was just a masterclass in clandestine work. He had to rely on this secret network to gather stories from survivors, get documents smuggled in from exiles, and he was constantly moving the manuscript to avoid raids. He was always just one step ahead of the police, spies, and the informers. And this is the battle that's being fought. On one side, you have the government's official story, madmen and criminals. And on the other, you have Étienne's chronicle, a noble, even if it failed, attempt to build a more just world. His book was a direct challenge to the state's entire version of reality. And the resistance wasn't just happening in Paris. This incredibly powerful message, smuggled from a penal colony on the other side of the planet, it just shows you the unbroken spirit of the survivors. Even when they were facing a slow death from disease and despair, they organized schools and mutual aid societies. They simply refused to be forgotten. So, after years of this secret, dangerous work, Étienne finally finishes his chronicle. But now comes the most dangerous part, getting the manuscript, this entire archive of dissent, out of France to a place where it can actually be published.
The escape is just harrowing. He's guided by a smuggler whose own son was killed in the Commune, and he makes this desperate journey through the Alps. They get ambushed by border guards, and in this frantic chase in the dark, Étienne barely saves the manuscript from falling off a cliff. He finally makes it to Geneva, totally exhausted, but triumphant.
And all that risk, all of it, leads to this one moment. In the safety of Switzerland, the communard exiles, they see the chronicle for exactly what it is, the most important record of their revolution. They work tirelessly to publish it, and they give it the title L'Aube Rouge, the Red Dawn.
Predictably, the French government immediately bans the book. But here's the thing, you can't really ban an idea, can you? Copies are smuggled back into France, passed from hand to hand in secret meetings, and copied by candlelight in workers' tiny apartments. The story refused to die.
This letter to Étienne from a friend back in Paris, it really just says it all. The Chronicle wasn't just a book, it was an act of resurrection. It gave names back to the nameless dead. It broke the state-enforced silence. It mattered. And it gave people hope.
And that really leaves us with this question, doesn't it? The army of Versailles won. They had the guns, the power, the prisons. But Étienne Mercier, he had a story. And in the end, it was the story that endured, that inspired future generations, and that made sure the Red Dawn would not be forgotten. So what do you think is truly more powerful?